So for this part, we're going to talk about how to decide what to do. So you've just received the report and you had a conversation with the person. You had a gauge of like how much they wanted to do and how much they were willing to disclose. And with all of that information, then you can make a decision about what to do. And sometimes it's really straightforward. Maybe it's very clear in your code of conduct that if certain behavior happens, then there's this very specific consequence. So that's easy. But sometimes the situations are a little more tricky and a little more intricate. And so it can be a little harder to decide what to do. So I'm going to bring up a few things. The first one is I think you have a very important responsibility towards the person who gave you the report. And that responsibility, I think, is essential and central. Someone came to you and they trusted you with their story. They shared with you something that was very vulnerable. And so I think it's really important to honor what they want and really protect them from any further harm. I also think you have a responsibility as a safer space organizer towards your community, and it's also important, regardless of what the person wants, you also make sure that they will not get hurt as well. And sometimes those two can enter into conflict, and those are the worst cases. So I had the example of someone reporting to me that they had an experience of sexual assault from someone who was regularly attending my event. And that person was very insistent that they did not want that information to be disclosed and that they didn't want anything to happen, and they didn't want me to approach that person with any information. And so there was a real struggle for me because I both wanted to keep my community safe and intervene and maybe protect them from this person, but I also really wanted to respect the will and the trust that the person who reported to me had granted me. So in that situation, I think it's really important to have a network of people who are also invested in safer spaces. It can be in other theater. I think in general it's a good rule of thumb to have somebody who's removed from the situation and who doesn't know the people, so that you can talk with them about the situation without telling them any names or any identifying details, and the information you're sharing with them won't really matter to them. Like they won't know anyone, they won't be able to identify anyone, and then you can have a very open conversation and share your doubts and share your struggle with the situation, and I've found that to be very, very helpful. I can also make myself available if you need to talk about some tricky situation, so don't hesitate to contact me as well. In addition to that, I think it's also really important to make your own mind about the situation. It's important to feel authentic, both in what you're going to do and with the values of the space and the value you've set for the space. And to do that, generally, I try to keep gathering information after having the conversation with the person who reported to me. So I will typically ask a few questions, or really put my attention towards observing the dynamic in the group or the behavior of the person who made someone else feel uncomfortable, and try to make my own mind. And I think that's important, so that I feel good and I feel authentic about the decision I'm going to make. And touching on that, I think it's also important to understand that sometimes people are going to report to you from a place of biases, and biases that might be against the values you have. For example, in dancing, if someone comes to me and say, there's someone who's really shady and they keep snooping around, I'm afraid that they're going to steal some stuff from my purse. And I look at them and I see someone behaving totally normally, and they're just the only black person in a room full of white people, then probably the person who's coming to report to me isn't coming from a place that I really want to enforce. They might feel genuine distress and genuine discomfort with the person being there, but in the values I'm trying to enforce, I really want to make sure that person feels welcome, and going to them and saying like, hey, please don't steal anything, would be really racist and against the values I have. So again, I think it's important to also make up your own mind and make sure that you're in line with your values when you enforce the policies and the reports you get. And again, that can lead you into a very tricky situation where you have someone who had a very distressed and upsetting experience, but in your mind you might see how it might come from a place of just discomfort with someone's identity. So for example, some heterosexual men might feel very comfortable kissing every other heterosexual man in your group, but if there's a gay person coming up, they might be very, very awkward and don't want them to perform actually a stage kiss with them, and report to you that they feel like this person keeps flirting with them and making advances. And again, you might want to like really check for yourself if the behavior of this person is really different, and if they're actually harassing that person, or if that impression is just coming from a place of biases. So I think it's important to mitigate that and make a decision that's in line with your values. The third thing I want to address is that there's a question that will come up, and I think it's important to address it early on and make a decision about that, is that are you going to address things that haven't happened in your space? So let's say, for example, after a class, all of your students go to have a drink together, and then somebody makes a comment that makes someone else feel uncomfortable. Is it something that you want to address? It didn't happen in your space, but it has definitely an impact on how people behave. It's a very cute dog that's coming our way. I'm going to show it to you. Just wait a second. Very cute. Yeah, so as I was saying, I think it's important to, in my opinion, it's important to address things even if they don't happen in your space, because it affects the dynamics of the people. And some people might try to push back and say that if it didn't happen in your space, then your code of conduct doesn't apply. But I think it's in my opinion, it's important to also address those events if they happen in the community, if they happen on stage or off stage. Everything counts. If people are uncomfortable, if people feel that their safety is threatened, I think it's a responsibility to act, and at the very least, inside of the space you're having, make sure that the relationships are at ease. The last thing I want to bring up about deciding what to do is that there's two models of justice. And the current model we live in is kind of a punitive justice, and it has some upside, but it's not my favorite. But to describe it quickly, the model of punitive justice is you've done something that broke the code of conduct, or that broke a rule, that broke a law, and then there's a consequence for that, and the consequence is punishment. And punishment is going to be something that's a little unrelated to what the person who was hurt by your behavior wants or will make them feel better, and is decided by a third party who will make a judgment about that. And your punishment will be fairly unrelated to whatever you have done. That model is a little simpler to deal with, and it can save you a lot of work and a lot of thinking if you have a system that's very set. I tend to prefer approaches of restorative justice. The idea of restorative justice is comes from recentering the person who was hurt, And with the idea of like when somebody makes someone else feel uncomfortable or hurts somebody else, then there's a break in the community, and you want to restore both the community and the people, with the idea that hurt people, and if someone comes to a point of hurting someone else or behaving in ways that are very selfish, it probably also comes from a place of hurt, and so the idea is to put back in the center the person who was made feel uncomfortable, ask them for what they want, ask them for what would make them feel better, and design a process that will lead to restoration of the relationship or of the community, and have a community that's at ease and at peace. And there's a lot of ways to make that happen, but typically, if I was to summarize and simplify the way I apply it, is typically I will ask the person what they need or what they want. Maybe they want an apology, maybe they want a box of chocolate as an apology. In cases that are more serious and a little more severe, maybe they want the person to go to therapy, maybe they want them to really work on that behavior and show improvement. Or maybe in some cases, the most extreme, they don't want to see them ever again, which is also something that I want to take into account. Again, I want to center the person who was hurt in the events that have been reported to me. But I also don't want to dehumanize the person who made the other person feel uncomfortable. So it's really important for me to have a conversation with them, hear about what their experience was, what their values are, what they want to do, and most often I feel like their values are actually not completely inconsistent with the values of the space and my values, and so it's really a matter of like discussing behavior and discussing strategies to ensure that they will behave in a way that fits with their values and with the values of the space. So typically I will have a conversation with them, agree on a set of behavior that they will take, and agree on a set of steps or procedures. So maybe for a month or for a couple of months they will practice doing something a little different, and we'll have a few check-in meetings where we can discuss about the progress they're making until their behavior is more consistent with their values and the values of the space. And then we'll reach again a degree of restoration, and again also taking into that process into account how they can make it up to the person that they've hurt. All right, to conclude this part and to summarize, I think to make a decision about what you do, you need to make a few choices about the approach you're going to do. Do you want to restore the situation, or do you want to have a more punitive approach? And really make up your mind and make a decision that's in line with your values, having gathered as much information as you possibly can about the situation. To exercise and to finish this part, I would like you to gather your Safer Space team or your group or the organizers and go through a few situations that will be listed in the doc, and make a decision about what you would do in that type of situation. I think everything can range from just having a conversation about someone and telling them that their behavior was inappropriate to like having a different set of rules for the person. And so, for example, a rule that's very common in dancing that I ask people to follow is, when I feel that they're not very good at navigating sexual consent, then I might say, you can come dance here, but I will ask you not to date anyone that you meet through dancing. And usually this has like an expiration date where we'll rediscuss that, but it's just to give you an example of like modifying slightly the rule for a certain person when their behavior doesn't align with your values, so that their behavior doesn't hurt people in your community. And And then a little more severe will be like asking people to not come back to your event temporarily, or you can decide to permanently ask someone to not come. So those are kind of like the range and the different options you have. And so you're going to face a few different situations, and I will ask you to decide what you're going to do about it and how you will approach the situation. And I will let you practice that exercise, and I'll find you again to talk about how to have the conversation you need to have once you've made a decision.